Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Mikky. I'm presenting or recording the lecture on Chapter 1, which is the Introduction to Pharmacology. And we'll start with the learning outcomes or objectives. This lecture is that I'm going to identify the events or elements of the history of pharmacology briefly, um, look at the nature of pharmacology, and to um, describe what meant by the drug mechanism of action. What is the difference between drug's chemical name, generic name, or trade name? So it's like introductory session to the class, pharmacology class. All right, so now the first slide talks about the history of pharmacology, in which that the modern pharmacology started to begin in early 1800s, in which that the chemists they were like able to separate specific substances from complex mixtures. That enabled chemists to isolate the active agents of like medications like morphine, colchicine, which is drug for gout, Curia, which is kind of toxic chemical, cocaine, and all of these were like extracted from their natural plant products, or like they were products of the natural plant. And then in the 20th century, um, there were like they continued to um, produce more drugs and manufacture more medications, and drugs are being synthesized in the lab. Now, the pharmacologists, they are able to synthesize drugs at this point. They are better understanding. They are, they're able to understand the mechanism of action of these drugs. The current pharmacology practice is very complex, and in which that the health professionals, they nurses included, including nurses, that they have to remember all the roots of pharmacology. They understand the all the medications are given to the patient, the names, the mechanisms of action, the signs and symptoms of, or the side adverse effects of uh, each and every drug given to the patient, administered to the patient. Um, and also we include, and within this list of medications here and pharmacology, the herbs and the herbal remedies given to the patient to relieve human pain, and also to mitigate and to treat other conditions. So central purpose of pharmacology what's the main purpose? It's usually focused on two things, or at least just one main element, which is that the as we focus on the patient, is to improve their quality of life. So that's the main point, or um, optimal outcome should be to improve patients' quality of life. So nurses should remember, or should like never forget, the early roots of pharmacology, as we remember this um, ultimate goal is to improve the patient's quality of life. Um, the application of products to relieve human suffering. So that's another point, which is that as we apply these products, we administer these medications, that's to relieve human suffering, which includes all the preventive and curative or treatments and other areas of uh, use of these medications in healthcare. And we're going to highlight all of these elements and points in the upcoming slides. So pharmacology derives from two Greek words, the pharmakon, which is medicine, and logos, which is study. There are more than 100 trade name drugs available on the market. So each one has its own set of therapeutic application, adverse effects, mechanism of action, nursing implications, and other details about each and every specific drug that we're going to review and go over in Patho Pharm 1 and Patho Pharm 2. So if applied properly, the right way to drug is given and administered, the dosage and all the rights are followed and applied, then the drug can improve the quality of life um, and treat the patient's condition. So the pharmacology, as we define it, is the study of drugs and medicines then and their interactions with living systems. It's an expansive subject, range from understanding how drugs are administered to um, and where they travel in the human body. So they are being administered and then how they travel in the human body to the actual response they produce. So we kind of follow the drug since being administered and how it's absorbed, and it's being um, um, absorbed in the body, and then how it's gonna elicit or do the actual response in the related to that condition. So it will include knowledge of history, sources, and uses of drugs, as well as knowledge of the drug. Like we are going to cover for every single drug, we need to know about their absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. That's what I meant about following the drug since it's been administered until it's being excreted. So how it's been absorbed, distributed, so absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion. Four main steps and phases that the drug will follow or take since being administered until being excreted. Absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion. So the clinical pharmacology, which is the study of drugs in humans, um, so patients as well as in healthy volunteers, like in clinical trials. Sometimes we do something called clinical trials to check the effectiveness of the drug. Challenge for the nurse, learning the applications of existing drugs and staying current with new drugs introduced each year. So even I would say each day, there is a new drug that's going to be introduced. So we have to keep up with, all these medications are going to be manufactured and being released in the market and being given to the patient. So we have to be up to date with all of these medications because we are going to be the last in the chain in terms of from person who's or professional who has prescribed the drug. We're going to be the last one in the chain after being prepared, the dose and everything, and it's ready to be given. We're going to be the last one to give the drug. So you have to be aware of all these details about the drug, the names and the mechanism of action, side effects, adverse reactions, and so on, and nursing implications, dietary recommendations. All of these should be like mastered by the RN or the nurse should know all of these information to effectively administer the drug with least harm being inflicted on the patient and maximize the benefit. So the danger of improper application of drug, there are too many scenarios and too many reasons how the improper application of the drug might, result. The consequence of a drug action can cause either permanent disability, can be minimal harm. We cannot ignore that there could be like a minimal harm, or permanent disability, or even death. That sometimes given a potassium IV, for example, IV push, potassium IV push can kill the patient. And that's, I believe that you heard about this in other courses from other instructors, but there are too many examples and scenarios in which that, medication can be given to the patient wrong or improper way, or being wrongly, the dose is incorrect, or I know I know the rights of the arrest being not followed, or or being ignored, or overriding these rights, or ignoring these rights that could result in patients, disability or death. And there is always the question that being asked in pharmacology: is there an ideal or perfect drug? And the answer is always no, because each and every drug that's, every drug is a chemical component, unless it's plant or natural source. The As long as, once, that chemical component, then we anticipate there is some side effects from the drug. So there is no ideal or perfect drug. The nurses are most directly involved with patient care. So we are going to be the one who's going to educate the patient about these medications continuously. We are going to be consistently given the, patient education, providing patient education about these drugs, mechanism of action, drugs names, and we're trying to also to explain it in a language that they can, they can understand. So that's, these are, most of these patients are, like lay people. Some of them are educated, but we have to be like, considering the education level for each patient to be able to deliver the right and correct and proper information to the patient. So educating, managing, and monitoring about these medications. You give the medication, you have to assist the patient pre, during, and after giving the med. For many reasons, you are going to monitor the drug, or the patient taking the drug, because you want to make sure that the patient has, there is a benefit and there is no harm inflicted, from taking this drug, but there is always a benefit. So we monitor the patient pre, during, and post to assess the effectiveness of these medications administered to the patient. So learning the pharmacology extends beyond graduation for students. You will continuously going to post graduation, being employed in healthcare. You will continuously going to review and study and know about the new drugs being manufactured every single day. Therapeutics. We are known as the pharmacotherapeutics or pharmacotherapy. So therapeutics focus on disease prevention as well as treatment and pain management, is the application of drugs for the purpose of disease prevention, treatment of suffering. It is the use of the drugs also to diagnose, prevent, or treat diseases, or to prevent pregnancy. That's another, definition of therapeutics or pharmacotherapeutics, which is the use of drugs to diagnose, prevent, or treat disease, or to prevent pregnancy. So there are too many definitions of pharmacotherapeutics. So it's simply defined as the medical use of drugs. Drugs produce their effects, therapeutic and adverse effects. So there is, for almost all the drugs given, the medications given, there is always a therapeutic effect, and we have to identify what is the side effect, what is the adverse effect of this drug. So we need to know the reason for giving a particular drug for a particular patient, the rationale for selection of dosage, the route, the schedule of administration of that drug. So there's a lot of information that when it pertains to the specific drug being administered to the patient. The above information is crucial in order to promote beneficial drug effects and to minimize undesired effects. So we have too many examples. As you know, we go over the medications. We'll cover some of these undesired effects or the adverse effects for the drugs called side effects or adverse reactions. So the classification of drugs and medications fall into one of three general categories: drugs or medications, biologics or biosimilar drugs, and then we have the CAM therapy, or which is abbreviation of the complementary and alternative medical or medicine therapies. Um, Now, drugs, which is a chemical agent capable of producing biological responses within the body. Responses may be desirable, or which is, in other words, we can say desirable or therapeutic. Undesirable, which is adverse effects or side effects or adverse effects. Uh, so it's broadly defined, but any substance that is taken to prevent, cure, or reduce symptoms with a medical condition can be a drug, can be labeled or categorized as drug. Any chemical that can affect living processes. Um, can water be a drug? Yes, it can be. So normal saline, when it's given IV intravenous, that's we can call that a drug because it has an effect on the living processes and it has a specific mechanism going to increase the blood volume and treat some conditions. Water, the same thing. A patient who is thirsty to the point they become like dehydrated. Dehydration it's a health condition. Patient feel intake of fluid when patient is dehydrated, that's become a medical or becomes a drug or a medicine because that's gonna treat some type of health condition. And you can apply the same concept to the other examples. Medications track after it is administered is called a medication. Both drug and medication will be considered part of the body's normal activities. Biologics, examples would be like hormones, monoclonal antibodies, interferons, like when the medication is given for viral infections, natural blood products, that's a patient's plasma or packed or red blood cells, or whole blood, that's a blood product given to the patient with, for example, status post hemorrhage and severe bleeding. Vaccines to prevent disease. Biosimilar drugs that are chemically synthesized and they are closely related to biologic medications. The CAM therapy or complementary and alternative therapies, we call them CAM therapies, and they involve all the natural plant extracts, herbs, vitamins, minerals, dietary supplements, and there are too many body-based practices, um, acupuncture, hypnosis, massaging, physical therapy. So all of these are biofeedback. All these are different types of CAM therapy interventions. Now, effectiveness, it's a mechanism that we apply in pharmacology to test the drug's ability to prevent, cure, or treat the disease. So effectively treats, prevents, or cures the patient's condition. That's the optimal goal that from any drug. If it's effective, then it's able to prevent or cure or treat the patient's health condition. It will elicit the responses for which it's given. The most important property of the drug can have its effectiveness. And the US law requires that all new drugs are proved effective prior to being released for marketing. So before we market the drug and release it to the market, the US law requires that this is one of the most important steps is to prove the effectiveness of this drug before being released for marketing. And indications are the conditions for which the drug is approved. So we say that this drug is approved for diabetes. This drug is approved for hypertension. This drug is approved for gout. This drug is approved for cancer. So diabetes, cancer, gout, and all these conditions or hypertension are called indications for that specific drug. So if drug X is approved for and released in the market to treat patients' hypertension, then the indication is hypertension. Released in the market to treat cancer, then this drug, the indication for this drug will be cancer. So the indication is the condition for which the drug is being approved for or being released in the market for. Now, the unlabeled or off-labeled indications. So the indicated or labeled indications, those are the indications are known that this drug is released in the market to treat hypertension. That's labeled use. But the unlabeled use or off-labeled use is that when we found, sometimes we find that this drug also is good for another condition or other symptoms or manifestations. It can mitigate, for example, this drug is being produced to treat or released in the market to treat, let's say, diabetes, but also we found that this drug also can minimally or to some extent has the positive effect on treating blood pressure. So this is called the unlabeled use. The blood pressure is called the unlabeled indication or off-labeled indication. So drugs used for conditions for which they have not been approved. Now the safety, the drug that cannot produce harmful effects, even if administered in very high doses and over long periods of time. And I would say, as we have previously indicated, that there is no safe drug. All the drugs have some type of side effects and adverse reactions. So the adverse effects can be reduced by proper drug selection and proper dosing. That's why we say that there is no such a safe drug or a drug that's perfect, because we know that there should be some side effect, adverse effect or adverse reactions. And our job is to try to, as professionals, prescribers of the drug, we will find that we have to be committed to administer and prescribe, and then prescribe the right proper dose of the drug, and the proper selection of the drug to do a specific condition, to treat a specific condition. So the risk of adverse effects can never be eliminated. So we cannot eliminate to 100% or to 0% the adverse effects. So just keep in mind that there is no perfect drug, there is no safe drug, and that the risk of adverse effects can never be eliminated. Um, the all the drugs or medications it can treat the condition that will treat the condition, but at the same time it has adverse effects and effects that are going to be to some extent will be inflicting harm maybe to other to the other systems. And our job is to minimize these harms and I mean these side effects and these adverse reactions. So that's why the pharmacology knowledge is significant for that purpose. Selectivity, which the drug that elicits only the responses for which it is given. So if we are going to or anticipate that this drug is only going to decrease the blood pressure, it's given to treat patients' hypertension. So our goal is or anticipation that this drug is only going to have effect on the blood pressure only. So it will control the blood pressure, lower it, control it with no any other adverse reactions, no other effects on any on the other systems or other elements of the same system. So a selective drug, and that way, if that drug is going to result in decreasing or controlling blood pressure with no other reactions and other mechanisms or other symptoms or other adverse effects, then this drug is highly selective, extremely selective. So a selective drug would not produce side effects. Antihistamines, you give the antihistamine for to control, for example, the allergy or to prevent allergy or allergic reaction. Patients sometimes go into sleep or taking some of these medications like um, Benadryl, for example. So the sleep wasn't intended, so it's the side effect becoming sleepy from taking that antihistamine because it's a side effect of the antihistamine group. So the drug intended to control the allergic reaction, but at the same time resulted in sleep. Patient became sleepy. So the sleep reaction is a side effect from taking or side effect of that same drug that was intended supposed to be um, selectively should stop the allergic reaction. Oral contraceptives also there are too many side effects of oral contraceptives, especially with the cardiovascular system, myocardial infarctions and cardiac disease or thromboses and um, Prozac, which is an SSRI, which is fluoxetine, steroids. All of these medications has side effects. Now, steroids will have a whole chapter on steroids, talking about the which is steroids they call steroids is as a gold medicine or it's like a magic drug, but it's at the same time it can treat all the signs and symptoms of inflammation, but it also has severe adverse effects, adverse reactions. So the complications or the adverse effects from steroids also are severe. At the same time, it's very effective, to treat the inflammatory responses and signs and symptoms of inflammation. So the objective of the drug is going back to the same statement that we just previously discussed about the objective of the drug therapy. Our goal is to maximize benefit and minimize the harm, because we know that every single drug is as a chemical is going to result in some type of harm. Our goal by studying the pharmacology, understanding the mechanism of action, and how to maximize the benefit, at the same time, we're trying to minimize the harm. So the great drug, the drug that can provide maximal benefit with minimal harm. Like, for example, Prozac, there are too many side effects that may result from Prozac, which is the fluoxetine. Um, Visual changes, headache, dizziness, strange dreams, patient became like having that tremors and shaking, anxiety, like feeling anxious or nervous, um, weakness, pain, significant side effects, but there is always a reason for taking the drug. And we anticipate these side effects from the drug, but there is a maximal benefit from taking the drug, and we'll get to the psych medications. We'll go over these meds, and also these will be Prozac will be extensively covered in the psych mental health course. Factors that determine the intensity of drug responses. Many factors determine how an individual will respond to prescribed dosage or a dose of particular drug. How we react, how our body will respond to this prescribed dose of particular drug. It starts with administration. The first thing we'll give, first of all, we will prepare the drug, or comes mixed or prepared, or so. So we have to prepare the drug ready to be given, administered. So we'll administer the drug, administration of the drug. So administration of the drugs, determinants of drug responses in regard to administration, the dosage of the drug, the dose size, the route of the drug, how it's given. Is it given PO orally, intravenously IV, sub-Q, intradermally, intrathecal, like in the spinal cord, through the spinal cord, directly the spinal cord intrathecal. There are too many routes of administration of these drugs. And then timing of the administration. Is it in the morning? How frequency? How many times? Twice a day, 3 times a day, 4 times a day, every 8 hours, every 12 hours. Is it should be given in the morning if once, or if it's once, should be given in the afternoon or evening or nighttime. So that these three elements or determinants are very important in terms of what is called determinants of drug responses regarding administration: the dosage, the route, and timing. Now, the drugs are not always administered as prescribed. We can anticipate that the drugs, when they are not being administered as prescribed, it's either due to medical error. You plan to give the drug intravenous, and then you just didn't know, forgot, or for some reason. There always we have to investigate also for reasons for medical errors, and we found that the patient received the drug intravenous instead of being given sub-Q, for example, or the PO was supposed to be sublingual and was given swallowed. So, or sometimes swish and spit instead, given PO or swallowed instead of being like swish and spit, for example, like an antifungal solution. So the medication errors, the main reason why the drugs are not being administered as prescribed. Another reason is the patient's adherence. And most of the time, the patients with chronic illness, they will be on their own, and they will be home or home setting or nursing home, long-term facility, assisted living facility. They'll be living on their own, and they will be taking the drug on their own. So they are responsible for taking these drugs. And for some reason, patient either took a double dose, patient did not take the drug for a few days, or so there is always a reason that for patients not being adherent or compliant with the drug regimen. Patient's adherence is another main factor for the drugs not to be administered as prescribed. Medication errors, patient adherence. Pharmacokinetics. The processes that determine how much of an administered dose gets to its site of action. We can look at this pharmacokinetics as the impact of the drug, of the body on drugs, the impact of human body on medications. And there are 4 major processes that govern or included within the pharmacokinetics. Pharmacokinetics is the dynamic. Look at it as um, as kinetics. Kinetics in terms of absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion. Kinetics means drug absorption. So pharmacokinetics will include the four main processes: drug absorption, drug distribution, drug metabolism, and drug excretion. However, the pharmacodynamics is the process that determines the nature and intensity of the response. Pharmacokinetics determine how much of that administered drug gets into the site of action, being absorbed, distributed, metabolized, and excreted. And then pharmacodynamics determine the nature and intensity of the response. In other words, the impact of the drug on the body. Drug receptor interaction, because any drug to elicit the effect, it has to do some type of interaction with the receptor. We call that drug receptor interaction. There are some drugs, maybe not too many, that will elicit the reaction or there is an action of the drug that will result without so it's receptorless with no receptors. But most of the drugs will elicit the effect or the response based on the drug receptor interaction. So think of this as an impact of drug on the body. So three main elements. The first one is the drug receptor interaction, and the other element would be the patient's functional state, like for example, tolerance to the drug, and then placebo effect. So these are some examples of the impact of the drugs on the body. But the main one is the drug receptor interaction. Other elements like placebo effect, or the patient's functional state, which is like tolerance. This is an example of the pertains to the diabetes and type 1 and type 2, how it's the type 1 is differentiated from type 2 diabetes. The glucose molecules, for example, to enter the body, they have to be escorted by the insulin. So the insulin is responsible for letting the glucose molecules to enter the cell for metabolism, to be used as a source of energy. Type 1 diabetes, that's when there is no insulin, so the door is locked. So when you look at the door, it's completely closed, unlocked, and the key is lost. So that's type 1. Type 2, because there is no insulin, is going to result in allowing some of these, so no glucose molecules will enter the cell. However, in type 2 diabetes, there will be some, so this is called a lock and key mechanism. The drug has to interact with the receptor. So the type 2 diabetes, that's when there is a small amount of insulin that will keep the door slightly open, and very few glucose molecules will enter the cell for metabolism. But in both case scenarios, either the door is completely locked or slightly open, is that there will be a significant amount of glucose molecules in the blood, and that's called hyperglycemia. And that's because of the insulin depletion or absence of insulin in type 1 diabetes. So in type 1 diabetes, there is no insulin, but in type 2, there is small amount of insulin or insufficient amount of insulin. But in both scenarios, there is no adequate amount of insulin to allow for all these molecules or glucose molecules to exit the bloodstream into the cells for metabolism. Then we anticipate large amount of or a significant amount of glucose molecules to stay in the bloodstream and result in hyperglycemia, which is diabetes. Now, sources of individual variation. We slide over some of these, or probably highlighted some of these elements in the previous slides. So unique patient characteristics can influence both pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, both processes. The four major factors are the physiologic, pathologic, genetic, and the drug interaction. Administration, we highlighted two main ones. We said medication errors and patient adherence. Pharmacokinetics, absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. And pharmacodynamics, the three main elements are the drug receptor interaction, patient functional state, like patient's tolerance, and placebo effect. The individual variation will be due to the physiologic, pathologic, genetic, and drug interactions. And we will go over these differences. And for example, children, elderly, gender, during pregnancy or lactation, all of these differences pertains to these factors will be highlighted in different chapters. Now, FDA-approved drugs, there are more than 11,000 approved drugs are listed in the Orange Book. And two basic classifications of drugs. Either drug is classified, or both. I mean, each drug and every drug should be classified in two different classifications. The first classification will be, is called therapeutic, and the other one is called pharmacologic. So the therapeutic classification organization based on therapeutic usefulness describes what is being treated by the patient, what exactly the condition or health condition or disease is being treated by that specific drug. The drugs are placed into therapeutic classes based on their usefulness in treating a specific disease. So they are placed into therapeutic classes based on the drug's usefulness or these usefulness of these drugs in treating specific diseases. Therapeutic classification or pharmacologic classification. So therapeutic classification, the first classification. The second one is pharmacologic classification, which is based on the way the drug works at a molecular, tissue, or body system level, and often represents mechanism of action of the drug. Describes how the drug acts in the body and that specific system. Should address the drug's mechanism of action and how the drug produces its effect on the body. More specific than its therapeutic classification. Therapeutic classification will select antihypertensive drug. So it's to treat the hypertension. Pharmacological classification will go into more detailed, more specific mechanism. And it requires an understanding of the biochemistry and physiology. May use drug's chemical name sometimes. And both classifications are widely used, but we are going to the mechanism or the style or the structure of the pharmacology content in this Pharm integrated Pharm course will be provided or presented in a prototype drug format, in which that prototype drug is going to be highlighted and identified as the main drug from that category of that classification, and then anticipating, and we anticipate that all the drugs in that classification will be similar to that prototype drug in terms of mechanism of action, side effects, adverse reactions, nursing implications, and so forth. So it is the agent to which all other drugs in the class are compared. It's a common and useful practice to select a single drug from that class and compare all other medications in that class to this representative medication. This is called prototype drug. And we have two main examples here. For example, it's for top table, the usefulness compared to the drug classification. So when we see anticoagulant, that's therapeutic classification. But usefulness is to influence blood clotting, or in lay terms, lay people will call that blood thinner. Drug classification as anti-hyperlipidemic drug, usefulness is to lower blood cholesterol or lipids, and so forth. Antihypertensive to lower the blood pressure, antidysrhythmic to control or restore normal cardiac rhythm, anti-anginal to treat angina. On the next table, or the bottom table, the top one is therapeutic classification, anticoagulant. The bottom one is the pharmacology classification. Diuretics, for example, lowers the plasma volume. Drug names. The generic name versus trade name. ATI will provide you with the left-hand column, which is generic name of the drug. It will be provided as TMP SMZ, which is trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole. Trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, they will never provide it as will be provided in the exam or ATI test as Bactrim. It will be provided as trimethoprim slash sulfamethoxazole, because that's two components in one drug, or in one tablet. So there are in each tablet there is an 80 milligrams of the methoxazole, and I'm sorry, of the trimethoprim, and 400 milligrams of sulfamethoxazole. Trimethoprim 80 milligrams, 400 milligrams of sulfamethoxazole. So the combined in one tablet. Warfarin sodium, generic name. Trade name, Coumadin. Phenytoin sodium, generic name. Trade name, Dilantin. Levodopa, carbidopa, also two components, two drugs in one tablet. It's called Cinemet as a trade name. Lasix, trade name. Generic name is furosemide. Propranolol, generic name. Trade name is Enderal. So the challenge here, or for nurses, is to master all these drugs in terms of their names, how they are pronounced, and in some scenarios, we recommend that we call the drugs by their generic name, that their trade name. That sometimes nurses and even physicians and nurse practitioners will most likely in the hospital you will hear them providing or giving the drug, or pronouncing the drug, or prescribing the drug using the trade name instead of the generic name. But we recommend that both the trade and generic name. Chemical name, we don't recommend, I mean, we don't anticipate that, students will be able to, or, that or recommended or required to know the chemical names. And it's um, there's only one chemical name always for any specific drug. There's only one chemical name, but for each drug, then you'll find more than one. I mean, even one generic, but too many trade names. And these are some examples for the acetaminophen. See how long is that acetaminophen chemical name in acetyl para aminophenol. So that's a long chemical name for acetaminophen, which is a generic name, and then Tylenol is the brand name or trade name. So generic name is acetaminophen. Um, and these names are usually the non-proprietary names, or they are like U.S. adopted names, and these names are assigned by the U.S. Adopted Name Council, U.S. Adopted Name Council. The and they are less complicated and easier to pronounce and remember than the uh, uh, chemical names. So many organizations, they use generic names to describe medications. Only one generic name. You'll find there are too many trade names because each company, company will um, give the drug or the generic name a different trade or brand name. Trade names like see how many we have, like 4 trade names for the acetaminophen, which is the generic name. So the trade name that's proprietary means that um, that that a drug developer has exclusive rights to name and market the drug for 17 years after a new drug application is submitted. And this kind of process of the application um, for a new drug by pharmaceutical companies, and how since they start working on the drug until being released in the market, this is the process we're going to cover in Patho Pharm 2 next fall. But the concept of proprietary names means that the drug developer has exclusive rights to name and market the drug for 17 years after the new drug application is submitted. There's an application called the new drug application. Since that being submitted and approved, then that company has the right to market the drug for 17 years before being manufactured by another company. One of the FDA laws or regulations in 1999, you can tell from the list of the drugs here, is that like monostat 1, it's for mostly lay people, is hard for them to, when you go like over the counter meds, to grab one of these medications that are over the counter medications, is to differentiate between these medications. So in 1999, the FDA issued a ruling or law to reduce the confusion of trade names, for over-the-counter medications, the OTC drugs. the FDA ruling was to reduce the confusion of trade names for OTC drugs only. So the generic names for the drug in over-the-counter products is clearly listed on the label using standardized format. So it is, since the 1999, there is a standardized format that all companies, when they write the label, they're supposed to follow that format. So that will be easy for for anyone who would, either, purchase, or most, I would say, for lay people to understand, the the uh, the uh, the ingredients of the drug, and how to, as to read the label, so that all these generic names for the drugs and the over-the-counter products are clearly listed on the label using standardized format. So that will eliminate some of these confusions when it comes to purchasing an over-the-counter med. So prescription drugs versus over-the-counter drugs, OTC drugs. Prescription drugs were in orders for someone with legal authority to write prescription, MD, nurse practitioners. They are able to prescribe medications. Over-the-counter drugs, that's all, it's called the OTC, or abbreviation is OTC. And they do not require the healthcare provider's order, even though they may also have serious adverse effects. And especially most of the time, if not being used properly, or being overdosed, or patients took it, did not follow the recommendations, or the proposed method of administration, dosing, so that could result in serious adverse effects. So drug formulations are not always the same, despite dosage being identical. Now, other filler ingredients may cause problems, so important that trade names and generic medications work the same. Now, measurements of the bioavailability, there's something called bioavailability. So the measurement of the bioavailability may be kept in comparison of trade name and generic medications. There's always been the question of, people when they purchase the drug, or trying to go to get a drug, is this generic, or this is the trade versus generics. So the bioavailability is the physiologic. So first of all, the measurement of bioavailability may be kept in comparison of trade name and generic medications. So this bioavailability is a physiologic ability of the drug to reach targeted cells and produce its effect. So that's anticipation of this drug to be bioavailable, in terms of that its physiologic ability of this drug to reach target cells and produce its effect. Anything that affects drug absorption also affects bioavailability. The key to comparing brand name drugs and their generic equivalents, it lies in measuring the bioavailability of these two drugs, or two agents. And it's affected by the inner ingredient, table compression, which involves the manufacturing the drug in the pharmaceutical company, and the factors that affect the absorption. And by equivalent, when both generic and trade products have the same rate of absorption and same onset of therapeutic action. And with the onset of the action means when the therapeutic effectiveness or action will start. Take the Tylenol, another drug, for example, for headache, to different patients. these two different medications, Tylenol, start to alleviate the pain, the headache within 2 minutes, within 15 minutes. The other drug started, let's say, after 20 minutes. So it's not, they are not bioequivalent. So um, this is that concludes the lecture of chapter 1.